in the few minutes that remain, I'll try to cover this very important topic. By the way, I don't understand why it's called a mündliche Prüfung. If this oral exam occurs throughout the continent, I suppose the French have their own phrase for it, and the Italians also. Does anyone have the sense that there's a kind of creeping German control of this? No? Is it just my paranoia? Well, okay. Now, dealing with the topic of liberalism, and it's inevitable that we have to deal with the terminological question. At the end of his Constitution of Liberty, Hayek considers the question, what should we call ourselves? And he says, well, we can't call ourselves liberals anymore because that's a lost cause. And he says we shouldn't call ourselves libertarians because that sounds very gimmicky and contrived. So Hayek comes to the conclusion that what we should call ourselves is old Whigs. So what's your point of view? Well, I'm an old Whig. It's a good thing that Hayek went in for theoretical economics and not marketing, I think. I have an essay coming out in the Independent Review. I don't know if you know that publication. It's put out by the Independent Institute, and Bob Higgs edits it. And my article is on was Keynes a liberal? That is, John Maynard Keynes, the famous Keynes. Was he a liberal? Everybody says he was a liberal. And I give reasons why that's incorrect and really renders the term liberal incoherent. Naturally, it's because of his support of incessant government interventions. And the person who knows everything about Keynes on that subject is Professor Salerno, if you have any interest in pursuing it. But what I mention is a radio address, a radio review that Keynes delivered in 1936, which Skidelsky, Robert Skidelsky has these 3 huge volumes, a biography of Keynes. He didn't have any room to discuss this somehow, but you can find it in Keynes's collected writings. This is a review of a book by 2 of Keynes's friends, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. And the book is Soviet Russia, A New Civilization. You've heard the term fellow traveler, probably. This is the epitome of fellow traveling literature. They got all their facts and statistics from the Soviet secret police. It's a travesty, but Keynes praises this to the skies, and he says that the British people have a lot to learn from what's going on in the Soviet Union. This is 1936. This is the heyday of the purge trials. People are being sent to the gulag by the thousands every day. And so, how's this to be explained? Well, I'm assured by everybody, Hayek, for instance, who knew Keynes, that Keynes was a very intelligent man. So, what are the possibilities? How do you explain this ridiculous, shameful review of this pro-communist book? Well, maybe like a lot of reviewers, Keynes didn't read the book. Maybe he didn't read the newspapers to find out what was actually happening in Russia. Or, the last possibility, he was a blithering idiot of David Gordon proportions. Now, the question of liberalism instantly raises this terminological point. Because if you're going to stretch liberalism to include Mises as well as Keynes, then what's the use of the concept? It's interesting that the term liberal is used in this common sense, that includes Hillary Clinton and so on, in English-speaking countries. In France, for instance, libéral still means basically our kind of people. And ultra-liberal in France would mean libertarians. Joseph Schumpeter, in case you don't know this book, it's a very useful resource. Sorry about that, the hairiness of my hand. Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, he was an Austrian and an economist, but not an Austrian economist. That is, he was more of a classical economist. But he wrote this very useful history of economic analysis that you can look into for. It's really an encyclopedia more than anything else, and was not completed. But in the course of that, he mentions this switchover of the term liberal, and he says the enemies of free enterprise paid it an ultimate compliment of hijacking the term liberal for their own views. Frankly, I don't understand why. So basically, liberal is used in this very loose sense that includes Keynes in English-speaking countries, in America, in Canada, and Britain. I think that the reason for that is that the Anglophone people had or have a bias against anything that sounds like socialism. Crazy them. So that in logic, these people should call themselves social democrats, as they do in Germany and many other places. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's a respectable term. But I'm not going to be dealing with that kind of liberalism. Incidentally, best known, if you've ever been assigned anything on liberalism, they've probably assigned you. See, this minimizes my hand. See?
Now it's the invisible hand.
John Stuart Mill. He wrote a famous essay called On Liberty. So you might have been assigned that. Now, Mill says at the very beginning of that essay, I'm not going to deal with economic questions. He says free trade, but he means economic liberalism. Instead, he deals with freedom of opinion and freedom of competing lifestyles. Friedman said one time, the great majority of the human race is concerned with economic freedom. The freedom to buy and sell, the freedom to work where you want to, the freedom to invest your money, and so on. Mill, however, was a stereotypical intellectual. So for him, the important questions are freedom of expression and freedom of lifestyle. Now, I don't believe in psychoanalysis, but there's an obvious reason why he was concerned with problems of lifestyle. He was in love with Harriet Taylor, who was a married woman, and they had to wait until her husband passed away. There were no suspicious circumstances before they could get married. So, in other words, Mill was caught in this vice of English Puritanism. I suppose in France he could have had an affair with this lady, because what he says in On Liberty is that social pressure can be just as bad as government pressure. The pressure of social norms can be just as coercive as the pressure of the police power. Well, as Ein says in Atlas, people who say things like that should feel the difference on their backs. The difference, because they talk about the whip